welcome everyone. We're having a little technical difficulties earlier, but we're sorting those things out, and we'll do our best to try to make sure it doesn't continue. But we hopefully have a great show tonight. If I can figure things out myself, it's been a long time since I've actually been able to host an episode, so it's kind of nice to be back. We have Sir Bess, who just joined us since Sean had some stuff happen tonight, so he couldn't make it. So Bess said she'd come out, and I thought she'd be the perfect person to be on this episode, in fact. And we have Duke Ronald. And, I think just because you have a Duke in front of your name doesn't necessarily mean that you're great coming out the gate or that you're super athletic. And there's other reasons that people become good at our sport. So, and Ron has some great examples of that. That's why we really wanted to do this show for a while. And Ron and I had been talking about it, and it's nice to actually be able to come and do it this time. So tonight, of course, the show is really about kind of that natural, not natural, athletic, not athletic, those kinds of things you hear all the time, right? Gifted, whatever you want to call all those different things. And we're going to talk a little bit about the plus sides and minuses sides inside the SCA and how you get seen. And Ron probably has a lot of examples of that. And I'm sure Bess probably has some too. And we're also going to dive into an article. I'll post the article that's out there that talks a little bit more about, everything from natural ability to physical trainability to genetics to functionality and why sometimes good athletes aren't necessarily great practitioners in the end, and why some people that are maybe not gifted at the beginning end up being much better at the end. And there's we talk about this all the time. There's lots of examples that are going on right now in society in general. So first, I think we're going to go ahead and let's start with Ron. How about give us a little bit? You kind of sent us something and talked about kind of the introductory of how you got introduced kind of into fighting. So,
I started fighting at this point a bit over 45 years ago. Back during an incredible period of growth in the SCA, and I was kind of the kid on the playground that was always last to be picked for any game on the schoolyard. I was not a great athlete. I was very clumsy. I didn't have great hand speed. I didn't have anything. So, fortunately, what I did have though was I had great trainers. Paulo Bellatrix was at my practice every week, so I was able to train. But I still, being surrounded by really fast people like him, Radnor, Sagan, etc., I was still getting beaten because even though I was developing skill, I was just being outspeeded by these people. So I spent my early part of my career trying to figure out how to get around that. And basically I found it was just a combination of helmet time, getting myself to be in the best physical shape that I could, and also just developing a style that didn't depend on great hand speed and athleticism, developing a style that was way more in the mind than in the hand per se.
Brannos, you're muted.
Bess, can you tell us, obviously you just jumped into the sport and you were like super active and kicked everyone's butt, right?
Yeah, no. I found the SVA. I was a geeky kid at a con, actually. And I saw people in armor and I thought, well, I can do that, or I can roll dice. But it turned out when you're short and stocky, you're 22 and you haven't really done a lot of stuff in your life, it was harder than I thought. Unlike Ron, I didn't have a lot of super great trainers. It was a smaller group, but we had tenacity. We didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we were going to keep doing it. And so I think in my case, it was a lot of trial and error and more than anything, determination. I knew I liked it and I wanted to be better at something I liked, although I wasn't sure how to get any better at it. It's a weird combination of I really want to do this thing, but I don't know how, so I'll keep doing it wrong. It was a strange time.
No, I mean, I think that's actually, it's funny. I think early off, a lot of the great trainers were out west, right? And, Ron, when he moved on into this side, into the East Kingdom, brought some of that with him. But, it's interesting because I remember same here, we didn't have a lot of great trainers or anything. And I think it's, early off in our sport, it was the drive to become better and, constantly trying to find things and learn things and be innovative. And that's a way to get there, but sometimes it could be the longer way to get there, and especially when you're not naturally gifted in some cases. I mean, genetics does play a big role in what we do. It's not the final thing.
I think we have to acknowledge that before we go any farther. I don't want anybody to think that, at least I don't think that, there aren't certain advantages. If you're taller, if you have a longer reach, if you're stronger, I'm going to say you have an advantage. So please, if you're listening to this, at least with my comments, don't think that we're saying that there's no such thing. But this episode tonight is like, but what if you don't have those things? So the premise tonight is like, what if you don't have all those great things? What do you have? What can you do? Or, what can you do for it? So I just wanted to be really clear about my point of view. And I think those of you who watch know that I don't have anything natural.
And I think that's the big part of it. I think, the good part about comparing some natural abilities, because to tell you the truth, there's some great natural ability people out there that haven't been able to go forward in our sport because they're not used to learning. Where when you don't have natural ability, you learn very early off that you have to listen and learn, and how to fail and learn from your failures. Where some people who, it just works. And then when it stops working, they're like, I just can't do it. I don't know how to do it. Right.
Yeah, I think it's the prodigy sort of syndrome, right? Yeah. If you're natural at other sports, you come out and you're like, well, I'm not the best in 6 months. Well, this is stupid. I don't want to be here. Yeah. Whereas, as you say, if you're the weird kid in the corner, you're used to in your life, I have to practice day in and day out. And I think maybe you're not as discouraged as like the prodigy might be.
Exactly. Yeah. Ron, go ahead.
Actually, from what I've seen over the years, having natural speed or athleticism in some cases is detrimental to somebody's fighting career because they use it as a crutch. An example was one of my early squires in my career in the East, who went on to actually be really good, had incredible hand speed, and he thought that's all he needed. And he told me, I told him, I'm like, you react to things too fast. A lot of times when somebody has natural hand speed or strength or whatever, they use that as a crutch. And if somebody knows how to take advantage of that, and as in they know deceptive sword work, they know how to play their strength against them, then they find that, using their crutch for everything is sometimes going to lead to them getting beaten up pretty badly. With this particular person, I told him, I said, look, you're too fast. And he's like, and he literally looked at me and said, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. I started throwing like fakes at him, and I was just hitting him at will. And he was just losing it on me because he just didn't know how to handle it because he'd never had anybody do that to him before. So, I mean, that's one of the things I teach I teach everybody, but I teach in particular the people who have average or below average physical abilities. I'm like, look, you can take some advantage of somebody's hand speed and you can beat them with their own speed. Basically you just put them in a situation where they think that reacting fast is the right choice, and it's not. You can beat them.
Yep, I agree. And it's kind of funny because we talk about, genetically, it's like quick, being able to essentially have quick reactions and quick, kind of fast twitch fiber and things like that. What happens in those spaces is that Well, that works great when you're just blocking somebody. As soon as you add fakes and things like that in, now you're taking advantage of somebody being able to react quick by pulling them in one place and then going in a different place.
Well,
So
yeah,
those are pieces inside of how to, that's a mental aspect to the game of how to push people. So, there are places here mentally, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, that you can essentially use somebody's gifts against them. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like, as you say, putting tension in an area. I believe that's your term for it, is creating tension.
Yep.
But creating tension in a place that you want them to have it in, and then hit them somewhere else. But we'll talk about that later.
Yep. So just on my end, I actually came in. I was already a black belt. I was probably a mediocre, runner. I did a lot of track. I was, a sprinter. Not an endurance guy, by the way. In high school, I played a lot of soccer. Wasn't really built until after high school when I started lifting and things like that. I was on varsity teams. Go ahead.
You sound like you have all the stuff that you would need.
Yeah, and then 2 years later, so it came in out of kendo, competed really high in kendo and karate, and then in about 2 years in the SCA, I was like, okay, do I quit because I can't do this sport?
You were the prodigy type of thing that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah. Right. Because I never learned essentially how to learn, and I've never learned how to fail and then push through failure and learn from failure and push myself. And
recovered man.
And that's that's a huge piece. And thank God I stayed, because I got to meet a ton of people, and I got to be part of a wonderful community. And in that line, I learned how to learn, and it really helped me a great deal and enhanced my life that way. But it, even with, again, I wasn't top athlete in the world, but I was okay.
Yeah.
And I have some speed, I got movement, all of those things, but learning how to use them correctly is a big part of our sport specifically.
Yeah, actually, in my case, this is the only sport I've ever been good at. Every time I've tried to play volleyball or baseball or anything else, I've never had any real success at it. But this is the sport I wanted to do when I was a teenager. I saw it when I was 13 and went, wow, I want to do this. And, started when I was 14 and continue on through my teenage years, just, sort of, and then basically, once I put everything together with timing and deceptive sword work and all that, that's when I really took off.
Ron,
but I had no background sports wise besides this.
Yep. So I got a question. You talked about that in, you gave me an outline, and you also mentioned that, when you first got there, it was like, not only didn't you get a lot of training, but, nobody really thought of you as maybe a squire or something like that.
Well,
right?
Yeah, I'd actually asked several members of the chivalry at the time if I could squire to them, and they all said, well, it was always some sugar-coated version of, well, I'm looking for somebody who actually has some talent. And later on, I talked to one of them, and they were like, well, you just didn't seem like you were going to go anywhere. And I'm like, but I was one of the youngest royal peers in the history of the SCA. It's like, all you had to do is just work with me. It's like, and most knights did work with me. There was very few that just said, nah, but I did actually have a few knights that said, look, you're not worth my time, and that was disheartening, but but I've always been kind of a person that if you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to go the distance to do it just to spite you, so if you want to say, if I have a natural talent, it's spite.
I like it.
I say I can do all things through spite, which strengths.
Right.
And I guess that's, when you really look at talent or being a natural or anything, it's like, you look at who's a good team member when you're putting a team together. That's not necessarily talent, right? Or natural ability. That's a whole different animal. And if you look at somebody who's going to push through and have that the mental fortitude to push through things. That's not a natural ability either. These are learned things, and these are, you don't have to be a great physical specimen to learn or be those two things. But meanwhile, there's some great people out there that just learn to put a lot of hours in, put a lot of effort in, go out and try to learn everything they can, that became great players in almost any sport.
Right.
I think the mental portion of it, we talk about naturals. I may not have been a natural physically, but mentally I was ready to do, like you say, hours and hours and hours of boring stuff. And I still am, like I'll do what it takes to get back to where I want to be. And I think that's an important consideration, that perhaps when people talk about being a natural, that we don't give it enough of respect that frankly it deserves. You might be short and squat and not terribly athletic and not terribly coordinated, but if you are willing to put in, the hours, the time, and the effort to overcome this, because, I may not be the most graceful person, but my feet will go where they need to go. My body can do what it needs to go. Whereas somebody who it might be a natural can do it and they look like they're dancing. I don't think I'm ever going to look like I'm dancing when I'm fighting, but I'm willing to put in the time. And I would say to people who are watching, if you're wondering, well, I don't have a black belt, or I'm not terribly athletic, and I am wondering what to do, the stick to it, the willingness to put the time and effort and energy into it, I think really can't be underestimated, that importance.
Well, and that same thing, we talk about this a lot about, the hours and the time in and things like that. And really that's, that builds confidence, and confidence is also a huge part of what we do. Mm-hmm. And, and you may not start with confidence. And, the trick is, lots of people don't start with confidence, especially when you maybe don't have a sports background. And we're seeing more and more people like that. You have to build that space for them. You have to find and build confidence while you're building techniques, while you're building the mental game, while, all of these things come together to make a better fighter. And, many of those things we just talked about aren't natural abilities. Speed, power, strength, those are natural abilities, genetic abilities that come along. There's things we can work on individual. Some people, it's going to take a much longer time than somebody who got them genetically. Okay. And the ones who have genetically can probably still go even farther than somebody that's not enhanced genetically like that. Right. But it doesn't mean that that's those are just pieces of the fight. It's not the whole thing. To that point, Ron, you're talking, here's the next thing you wanted to talk about is a little bit about some of the things, you had something saying basically how you start. And the first thing you said was learn your body mechanics, kind of the Bellerick school of body mechanics, or really anyone who's has their school of thought on how to build mechanics, because there's lots of different schools of thought on each one of them, but find something, right?
Well, body mechanics are the great equalizer. I mean, that's how somebody without natural strength can throw a hard shot. As I said before in this, I was very fortunate to have Paul Bellatrix every week to show me body mechanics, and he showed, and every week we worked on it, and I got to the point where it was just second nature to throw shots like that. Where there are times I tried to demonstrate what the effects of not using body mechanics were, and I wasn't able to do it because basically it was so ingrained. And learning proper technique is, if you don't have the speed or the strength, is absolutely essential. And basically learning, and you got to find something that works for you, style wise, because not everybody's going to be able to fight like you or Bess or myself or any particular person. And that's why I really stray away from the whole cookie cutter approach to fighting, generally, especially when I give somebody that I know doesn't have a lot of a sports background or physical background, I try and figure out what they do have. For example, I had somebody that I was training who had a really good mind for things like chess, and he was a computer programmer, and so he was very good at analyzing things. So along with teaching him proper technique, I also taught him timing, deceptive sword work, and all that, and that got him through a lot of fights where he would have lost if he didn't have those things, if he was just trying to rely on just trying to out reflex his opponent. So, yeah.
No, go ahead if you finished up.
I'm sorry. So yeah, I mean, I also tell people that when they're doing, to practice your accuracy, with pal work, practice your technique. Accuracy will get you places that, because a lot of people who are really fast or really strong aren't very accurate. And if you're accurate, if you can, have a small grouping when you throw shots, your chances of beating somebody are much higher than if you just have fast hands and you're throwing wild.
Sorry, go ahead.
So I mean, what I did to develop this when I was a teenager was I would put a pal in my backyard, but I'd put a piece of tape at just above where most people's knees are, right where their temple is, and right about where their offside leg was, and I'd have somebody watch me as I threw, and I wouldn't look at the target. I would just throw, and I got to the point where I could throw 9 out of 10 and hit that piece of 1-inch wide tape exactly. So I could be talking to somebody to the side and throw the shot, and I can hit it every time almost. Making things second nature is a very important part of the training for somebody who's not naturally gifted physically.
Totally agree. Bess, you had something?
Yeah, it's just listening to what Ronald was saying. It reminded me of something actually I tell a lot of the female fighters, because a lot of the female fighters are not as strong as male fighters. Let's be honest about that. So I've often seen when male and female fighters come in to fight at the same time, the guys will get a lot more wins and they'll progress a lot more quickly for the first couple of years. And the women can get really discouraged. But what I say to them is, you need to work on your technique, because as Ronald said, you need to be technically perfect. Whereas frankly, some of the guys can come in and they can rely on their strength and their hand speed, and they don't have the technique. So in the first couple of years, the guys might be better than the women, but if you focus on your technique, and this really, it occurs to me, applies to any less athletically inclined person, you focus on your technique and your ability, you can catch up and exceed somebody who's not willing to work or doesn't work on their technique as much. The prodigy factor again. So Ronald, what you were saying about, really working on your shots and where they're coming in on the placement, I think that's something that really everybody needs to take into account, whether you're naturally strong, and you can just go in and win without a lot of technique, but even, and the people who are not as strong. I think that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think that's the we're seeing that in the mundane world, and that is that what's happening right now in the suburbs where, we had, and I've said this story a number of times, but we had a lot of inner city school kids come in the late 90s, early 2000s, and the schools, some of the private schools and other schools brought them in because they played good sports, right? There are a lot of natural genetic ability going on there, and some of that comes through genetics, some comes through the way you live, all of those. But now what we're finding in the last number of years is that private training and money and time and more training, and many adults living through their kids around the training and everything else, the kids getting more training and playing year round are technically much better than the others. They make less mistakes. They are technically better players, and they can still continue to develop some of the physical abilities they need. But that training has gone a long way. And in fact, there's a lot of issues in schools right now because unfortunately, the inner city school kids can't afford full-time year-round training, travel leagues, after school training after you're done with your normal high school training to get private training. If you go out on the internet, you can see private training all over the place, and how they tell you it helps everyone. We get private training in really even in business, and it helps those people. But in a school sport or something like that, it's a group training, and lots of those group trainings is you're covering the basics, because you can't cover to everybody's issues. Plus, there's so many people in a class that you tend to not listen. They say the average is you listen to somebody for about 9 minutes and then you're done and you're goofing around, and that's unfortunate for the kids that need the training to become better.
And probably, and I'm just thinking of, the Sunday practice that we did, when you have group training like that, you work at a certain pace, whether it works for everybody or not. And so you get, the weird kid in the corner who does their best to keep up, but because they can't work at their own pace, they just fall further and further behind. So I think that group practices like that, like you're talking about, for people who probably aren't as financially blessed as others, again, you see it that way. And you'd see it in the SCA too. If you can't go to 18 practices a week because you can't drive from here to there, or you don't have a car, and you're in a smaller city and you've got one practice, these are constraints to take as well into consideration. So I suppose, in a way, when we talk about athletics and skills and strength, one of the things is what are the personal circumstances of the people as well. Can you get out to a lot of practices? Are you working nights, and we all have practices at nights?
I would agree. And one thing I would like to say to everybody here, and this goes for naturals, athletic, non-athletic, because that type of thing and Ron covers it. He's, in his outline, he's like, okay, practice, train your accuracy, train your mechanics, train in the gym, run, practice, train your mind. You notice the key words here: train, 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 train. And when you, even an athlete with nobody around, that makes it really even hard for them. So this is just, be aware that everybody has challenges, even if you're genetically, you look like Uther and you throw like and you have all the power you want in the world, do what you can. You keep training, and you shouldn't compare yourself. I'm not gonna, and this is unfortunately, it's the way the world is built right now, and we compare ourselves to others, and we have to win to feel good about ourselves, because we want that dopamine fix, right? And every time so that means we have to, if we get that dopamine fix, we feel good right now. That means we got to go find it again. So we got to find someone else to win against. And, it's this constant, battle against somebody else. And it's not. The battle is yourself. What you should do is look at where you started and how, and where you are now. There are people that barely could throw a sword, but now they're throwing, and like Ron's saying, you practice accuracy, they're throwing and hitting a spot on a pell 9 out of 10 times. That's getting better. It doesn't mean that, winning isn't always getting better, right? You should be competing against yourself and trying to make yourself better. And that'll help you all through your career, even when your career is on the downslope. Even if you're an athlete, sooner or later, your career is on a downslope. And looking at that, trying to chase being better beating people becomes very difficult. And what you have to do is appreciate and keep learning and appreciate what you learn. So, that you can always do that through your whole career. So, Ron, you have a couple of, I like this one. It's like, use your time wisely. In other words, prioritize. And when you go to events, way too many people get caught up just chatting and wandering around and doing other stuff. You want to be great, but what are you doing to be great, right? I mean, what did you do at events, Ron?
Well, I'd always do pickups after the tournament. That was essential. Like if I fought a tournament after I got taken out, I looked for the other people who got taken out, and I got helmet time in. Helmet time is the most important thing about what we do. I mean, pell work is great, but as to paraphrase Bruce Lee, "Pels do not hit back." You know, I, when I was king for Pennsic 15, I put the idea in other kingdoms' heads to have tournaments at Pennsic, just because I wanted people to have tournaments and be able to fight with each other and get helmet time in instead of just standing around Pennsic and telling stories about last Pennsic. I firmly believe in using your time at practice, and like, go to practice and sure, chat some, but don't but the guys who stand around chatting all night are the ones who don't get knighted. The ones who go to Pennsic and drink all night, which sure, do that a couple of nights here or there, but don't go out to the pickup field, or don't go to Paul's seminars, or work with people, or put in the work. Because if you're in an inter-kingdom war, or you're at a large kingdom event, you've got lots of people to work with, different styles, different philosophies. It's all out there, and most knights are willing to work with you. So when I was young, I went after the biggest sticks that at any event or any practice I was at. And I got beaten up a lot. I went through several helmets. Back in the 70s and 80s, 14 gauge mild was what helmets were made out of, and you went through a helmet every couple of years if you fought with a bunch of mutants every week. But that was just part of the price of doing business. Went through 3 wooden shields a year. Putting the work in is absolutely essential. And if you don't have anybody else to fight, Pel work. And that was back before we had video. Now you have video. You can review videos. You can watch various styles. You can try and pick out their weaknesses. You can figure out how to exploit them as you're watching them. Today we have more tools than ever. So
yeah, I agree that we have a ton of tools now, and I think COVID has even made that more available. Obviously we were trying to start before COVID, but we ended up starting in COVID, and we have 163 episodes now. It's that kind of thing that we didn't necessarily have before, and now here we are, and people can watch, people can listen. Great Fighters YouTube is an example. There's a young gentleman on there, I think he just authorized. I think he's less than 8 months or so in, and he's getting reviews from some of the top fighters in the SCA on the show, because he tapes his video, he comes on the shows and shows his stuff, and we're like, okay, here, you're doing this well, you're not doing this, and you can see his progression is incredible, you know, and it's just fun to watch, and we all love helping, right, Ron? You talk about that. Helping is the best part, and so we all really enjoy it. So, we talked a little bit. You had a couple other points, including, learn to anticipate your opponent's reactions, and we talked a little bit about that earlier, and we talked about use your speed against them. But I like that you have one in here that's find what works for you, right? And and I think we're just starting to talk about it a little bit, in that we now live in a world where you can, a few mouse clicks away, you can see SCA fighting. And I think where you're getting there is go out there and find what you think, hey, that person's my size, or hey, that person doesn't throw fast, but boy, they win a lot. What are they doing, right?
Yeah. The double-edged sword to being a very competitive fighting area with a lot of really great fighters is that a lot of them, what works for them wouldn't work for me at all. So I would watch what they would do. I would listen to what they told me, but I'd have to adapt it to the fact that I was a few inches shorter than some of them. I wasn't as strong. I didn't have the hand speed. I didn't have the flexibility or coordination they did. So I kind of had to take what they taught me and reconstruct it into something that would work for me. But realize this was the early 80s and late 70s when a lot of this was happening. We've advanced a lot in how we train people now. So how I apply all this today is like, if somebody comes to practice, and they've been fighting for a little while, what I'll do is I'll go out there and I'll fight them some, just some sparring, not like crown tournament relo fighting, but I just want to see what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, and I also, I don't know if I'm skipping to another thing. Is I look at their equipment, like how's their shield strapped, like the less natural ability and less strength and speed and everything you have, the better balanced your swords and your shields need to be. And I can't emphasize this enough. If you have to fight your weapon and your shield along with your opponent, you're already halfway to losing. And so what I'll do is I'll watch how they move their shield, especially with strapped heaters. That's kind of my specialty. And I'll be like, why don't you move the handle a little bit here, move the strap up a little bit here, tighten it a little bit, because it's kind of loose and you don't have good control over it. So generally, you need to make sure that the less talent you have, the more everything else matters.
And I like that you bring that up. I think sometimes the less talent you have, the more you understand the struggle, right? And it's from day one, where somebody with a lot of talent doesn't understand. And we talked about that tiny bit in the beginning of the show. When you don't have to struggle so hard, we see these people that are incredibly smart, and they show this. There's these people that, they don't even have to crack a book in school, and they're passing tests, and they don't have to do homework and everything. They're getting A's and all of that stuff. And then there's people that they have to open that book every night to get a A or a B or a C, right? And it's funny, they have studies that show where these people that are gifted go into a room, they're given a problem that's unsolvable, and they actually they spend less time on the problem before they quit than the people who understood how to try to work a problem out, and how that, okay, it wasn't right, I'm going to fix it again. If it wasn't right, I'm going to do it again. So the kids that just gave up, they gave up after a very short number of attempts, where the other ones, their number of attempts were 2-3 times the amount that the first group did. And that it kind of talks about what, I sat in a room, I'm like, maybe I'll just do melee the rest of my life because I'm not very good. And when I say I wasn't very good, I was
just melee you. No, just in melee.
Well, the good part is melee is the great equalizer, right? In a lot of ways. And, and I still wanted to be part of the community because we have one of the best communities ever, right? And melee is even better. There's no better place to be part of a community than melee. And so I was sitting there one night and I'm like, I can beat knights, and I've beaten royal peers once in a while. And then I'd go out and the guy to just authorize would kill me. And I'm like, I don't know what's going on, And it took me a while to figure that out by myself because we just didn't have that education back then.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned melee. I mean, I have nothing against melee, and it's funny because the Principality of the Mist has a melee award, and I was the founding member of it because I was at every Inter-Kingdom War, every Principality War. I was always out there supporting war. And then I moved to the East, and that's all there was melee.
Yeah,
just melee. And I stopped fighting in melee. People are like, "Well, you just don't like melee." I'm like, I like melee, but I also like pizza. But if you fed it to me breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I'm gonna start hating it. And unfortunately, the East, especially in the '80s, being so Penn's-eccentric, was like that, But
yeah, and I think that's the big piece, and it was very Penn's-eccentric for most of the, obviously, Bess, you were part of the mid realm at the time, and that's all we had, right?
Yeah.
So Bess, I got a question for you. Sure. Who did you find that you thought your side? I remember you back when you first started fighting, so and we'll talk about that a little bit. But who did you find that kind of like, I want to fight like them?
There was really nobody that I could point to. So I was up in Skrilling, thing when I was fighting, which is Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And there was really a very small group of us after a while. Myself, now Sir Mencken and Sir Kennedy, both royal peers and everything. The three of us just fought each other. There was it was so long ago. It was, in the late 80s, early 90s. And there wasn't a whole lot of people around. I think there was one other woman in Ontario who fought, and she only did melees. So there was nobody really to see. But I will say it is no surprise. I was at a Pennsic once and I saw Fern. She had been knighted the year before, and she was a guard standing up in court, and she was wearing red and white, and it was lanced-necked, and all I could think of was I wanted to be her. And seeing Fern, and she's a couple inches taller than I am. I'm 5'4¾". I think Fern is about 5'7", but she was the closest. She was a woman. She was closer to my height than anybody else. So I could watch her and see what she had done. And just knowing that another woman could fight well was enough for me to know that it's possible for a woman to fight well. Because I do want to emphasize, this was a really long time ago.
Yeah.
Let's be, but we have to be honest when we say that. When I first joined the SCA, I was in Ottawa, and I called, and I was asked if women could fight, because I'd seen this shortly after I was at Gen Con, Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, and I was told that women could fight, but that they really didn't. It wasn't really encouraged. And I went, but there's no rule against it, right? And they said, well, there's no actual rule. But the implication was strong, of course, that women weren't supposed to fight. So, as I say, it wasn't so much that it was I wanted to fight like Fern, but I knew that Fern was there and Fern had done it, so it was possible.
Right.
So
and I think that's a big point right there is if it show you that it was possible, right?
It really was. That was the thing that really helped in some of the dark times.
Yeah.
Just knowing that it could be done. It might be hard. I didn't care if it was hard. I just didn't want it to be impossible.
Yeah. And I think, Ron, that's kind of what you got into a little bit, is that, everyone looked at you and were like, he ain't going to cut it, And I think you got the same thing that Bess got, and is like, oh, really? I'll show you how I'm going to do it. I'm going to work 10 times harder than everyone else.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. What really helped me out was going to practices besides the ones in the South Bay Area, because that was just like a real hotbed of like really like Paul Radnor, Sagan, those guys. So when I started going to practices outside there, that's when I realized, hey, I'm in a bubble, and I've seen people quit because they're in such a competitive bubble that they don't understand that the entire SCA isn't that, it isn't that hyper competitive, So like I started going to the Rockridge bar practice, and that was a much calmer scene. There were still good fighters there, but like some of them, like William Lucky, were also not very fast, not very coordinated. But William Lucky won 3 crown tournaments that way. So, and I realized, wow, if this guy could do it, I can find a way too. So really what you need to do is find somebody, as we said, roughly your build, roughly your ability, who succeeded, and say, okay, this might be a good pathway for me. You don't completely copy them, but take things from them and become the best version of yourself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that also goes into you have to go other places. Like if you have a very competitive practice, you have to go to other places to get a better feel on where you really are at, because sometimes you don't. We have that a lot in our practices. We just had a couple more people knighted here, and I look and I'm actually a little afraid, because it's like you come to practice and you have 8-10 knights and 3-4 unbelts, and it's like, that can be a bit demoralizing sometimes, if, especially when you have somebody like Broncolder that you're like, you think you're doing well, and then he's like, oh, okay, I'll fight you a little harder now. And then you never quite feel like you're ever getting anywhere. And then you go somewhere else and you're like, oh, okay, I'm getting somewhere. And I think that's the key again. And I'm going to focus on that, is get yourself a chance to see how you're really doing against your peers becomes a very big, powerful piece of this. Because if you're just always fighting people that are way over you, you're going to lose the mental mindset of confidence.
Right.
And confidence is a huge part of our game as well. So I want to cover something just real quick, and this is, I'm going to post and oh yeah, we got a question. Thanks, Sivert. The question is, when an older experienced, we cover this question quite a bit sometimes, but when an older experienced fighter has the only one way to learn mentality, gets a hold of a newer fighter, you know, and you can see that they're frustrated and it maybe the technique's not working for them. How do you approach that situation? So I'll cover it first. And although it's the same thing I said a couple of weeks ago, and that is the first piece you have to do is neither person should essentially ever tear down what somebody else is showing somebody. They can show them maybe some of the weaknesses around what they're doing. So that is like, okay, here's the weakness in doing this, but you can do this. Just be aware of the weaknesses and try to make up for those weaknesses. But to go out there and say that guy's teaching you all wrong, essentially actually makes you look like an ass. And I don't care how good you are. You know, you show people, help people understand the weaknesses and let them make the decisions. But you have to respect everybody. Great or not great should respect the time that somebody's trying to give somebody. And if it's dangerous, you might, after that fighter's done, you may go over to that fighter. You know, if you're a senior fighter and you know what he's doing is dangerous or illegal, you might pull that person to the side, not in front of the other person, and say, hey, what you're doing here is, you know, unfortunately, you know, we have learned over time that it's dangerous, and here's the reasons why it's dangerous. I just wanted to let you know so that hopefully you're careful with the other students you have. That way you're still respecting them as a trainer, but you're helping them learn. You know, and as a new trainer or as somebody of lower caliber, take the opportunity to learn from the people that are upper caliber. Sometimes you may feel like they're butting in on your territory. You're better off making friends and helping them find places to educate, and learning from that. Because if it's the fight, if you try to fight them, i.e. not physically fight, but fight their education of somebody else, then you still look like the bad person, even though it may be your practice. So be careful about ownership of people and of what you're teaching, because both of those are really negative in the long run.
Right.
So anyone else have anything on that?
Nope.
Actually, I do. So it's poor form if this person is training this person, it's poor form to interrupt in the middle of it. But the question seems to be if the newer person is getting frustrated because there's a one true way of learning or one true way of fighting, it's okay to come up to them afterwards to say, it seemed, I was watching, you know, I always like to listen to what people are saying, and it seemed to me that you were a little frustrated, or maybe you didn't understand. Perhaps I could show you or demonstrate what they were saying in a different way, because maybe they're saying, because that whole this is how you serve the bowl of soup thing never freaking worked for me, because I hold the bowl of soup up on each edge and I carefully put it down on the table. So this whole thing didn't work for me. But if somebody said do a karate chop, well, I could do a karate chop, you know, okay, that made sense to me. So it's okay to say I might have a different way, or, you know, if you are the frustrated person, to go up to some other fighter whose technique you like and go, I was talking to so and so and I didn't fully get it, and I feel like maybe you might have a different way of explaining it. I've heard you talk to other people. Could you tell me, or could you describe to me what you would do in this situation, or if this works, or what's your philosophy and thoughts about what they were saying?
Yeah, I totally agree. All right. So moving on, I'm going to post up a link. I posted up earlier. Let me post it in here now. It's a nice article I found. I posted the article or the link earlier in the comments on the website or on the feed. It talks about talent or training, the science of athletic success. And the one thing, there's a couple of things that came out in this I really did like, and I just want to bring out a couple of those pieces, and we'll talk about them a little bit. A lot of times, and good fighters, Ron, I am sure you've heard this already before, and that is, you put in lots of hours of training, and it's like somebody would be like, well, you're gifted, or you're just, they kind of discount all the effort that you put in to become right.
Oh yeah. Well, I get a lot of that, mainly due to the ages where I receive my accolades. And I explained to them, I said, look, it took me 2 years almost to win my first tournament fight. I was terrible. I mean, basically I got things young, but it was a lot of hard work. I mean, it was a lot of, it was a lot of hours on the Pell. It was a lot of hours of practice. It was a lot of picking people's brains. I mean, I was a real nuisance to a lot of my royal peers back in the late 70s and early 80s, like, kind of a who's who of, Westerners, Aidenvelt and Kite and, royal peers, and, where I'd basically be pestering them with question after question after question. And, they were all very patient. They were all like answering all my questions, and, and a lot of them, I've had the chance to come back later on, as a royal peer and say, hey, look, thank you. I mean, don't be afraid to approach somebody that you see of your stature, physically, that's succeeding. Don't be afraid to go to them and go, hey, what can I do to make myself better? But yeah, getting back to your point, I've been, I have to laugh whenever somebody says, well, you were just a natural who came in the SCA and started winning immediately. And I'm like, look, if you really want to see somebody laugh real hard, go tell that to Paul Bellatrix. Just say, hey, Ron must have been. In fact, I remember somebody telling him that, when I introduced another night from the East to Paul, they're like, wow, it must have been great working with a natural like Ron. And Paul laughed at him. He's like, really? So yeah, I mean, it's sort of, there's a meme out there that shows, the little tip of the iceberg is success, and then everything under the water level down to the bottom of the ocean is all the blood, sweat, tears, and work you put into it.
Yeah,
so,
and I think that's and that's the big point is, and also just beware when you say that to somebody, and maybe they were natural and they got it fast, and it's a perfectly good thing to say. But when you're somebody that's worked really hard and you're like, well, you got there because you're just a natural, you're discounting hours and hours and hundreds of hours of hard work that those people did. So be a little careful when you say those kinds of words.
Yeah. I mean,
because they like you, right?
Yeah. I mean, in my case, I always found it funny, but some other people just don't quite have my sense of humor. So,
So here you are, you're a young kid. You said you're one of the youngest royal peers. So what happens? People see a young kid coming in and doing well and think, oh, it doesn't count, except the hours that they don't. It's always the stuff they don't see. They don't see you doing the Pell work 5 nights a week, even if it's only 15 or 20 minutes. They don't see you asking the questions. They don't see people reading the books or hearing the conversations that go on to think about how do you expand yourself. You learn through conversations, and as you say, talking to people, harassing them, tell me this, give me this knowledge so that I can think about it and think about how to incorporate that. So if you are not naturally athletic and naturally inclined, sorry guys, the dogs have lost their mind tonight. So if you're not naturally inclined, and you might be thinking to yourself as you're watching this, I just, but I watch them, they come to practice and every week they're so much better. I would venture to say that there's more going on behind the scenes than you think.
Right.
And that doesn't make, what you're doing wrong. It just means that the people who will advance more quickly are putting the hours. They might have, if you have 100 hours in a year, they might have 300 hours in a year. When you hit 300 hours, you might be that good, but it's going to take you a lot more years to hit 300 hours. And when you've hit 300 hours, they're maybe now at 900 because they're always practicing.
Right.
So I think that's something really important to keep in mind. Hours in helm time, Pell time, it does make a difference. Its tenacity is so super important.
Well, and I'm going to jump to kind of one of the pieces in the article, and that is meaningful training. And they talk about the 10,000 hours to master a skill theory, right? But they also talk that you could take 10,000 hours of mastering something that isn't good, and you can, and given some other like things they did to show the difference, they essentially took a group of people, showed them something, and let them figure it out. And then they took another group and showed them how to do it, and then let them figure it out. It took them 1/10 of the time to do it correctly. And so, the type of practice you get, I'm going to tell you guys, Ron isn't that outgoing. He's not going to just walk up to every person and talk to him, because he's just, I love you, Ron, but you're a bit introverted as well, right?
Yeah.
And so, but he worked. He got, he wanted something so bad that he did things that were uncomfortable and asked questions, and he went to events to find people. Now we're so much luckier. We can just ping somebody. He's like, hey, can you review my video? Can I get some video of you? All of these things, to watch video of people in the comfort of home, compared to having to travel all over the place. Right, Ron?
Right. Well, it's funny. So when I was a teenager, I had a pretty bad speech impediment. So it was really tough for me to approach, especially somebody like a duke or a count, or reigning royalty, because I had a really bad speech impediment. So it was doubly tough for me. And it's funny, what eventually got rid of my speech impediment was being royalty. Because everyone was afraid when I won Miss Coronet. They're like, oh my God, this is going to be a disaster. And when I was up on the throne with the crown on my head or the coronet, I was, suddenly, like, too bad I couldn't wear a coronet mundanely. Because it suddenly went away. As soon as you put a crown on my head, it was like, boom, I can talk.
Well, that's another example of how the SCA kind of helped. And it helped me in the same way, Ron. When I won, I had lots of tutoring when I was young about reading and things. Well, guess what? As royalty, a lot of times you're reading out the book of ceremonies and things like that. I would practice those like a half hour before every practice I went to with somebody. We went through all of them. And then on the way to events, I would practice with my wife, just because I didn't want to have to read out of the book, because I knew how bad I was. So I would just have them follow with their finger. I could read the first sentence, and then it would catch in my mind, and I could keep going. So it's work. We do things because we want to be good. We want to be able to make courts look good and things like that. But you put into work at what you want to be good at. And that's fighting. If that's, theater, you want to be a good crown, then you're going to put in the work to be a good crown, and I think it goes a long way. But, I just also want to make sure everybody, that 10,000 hour thing, it kind of follows the same words as muscle memory. And just be careful. Muscle memory isn't actually muscle memory. It's neuromuscular, memory type of deal. And,
well, the only thing I can say to that 10,000 hours thing is practice either makes perfect or it makes permanent.
Yep.
So you can develop some bad habits in that 10,000 hours, and they're ingrained.
Only perfect practice makes perfect.
Yeah.
So I do want to address one thing, and it was a couple of viewers' comments, and it touches with, Ron, what you said earlier, asking questions. I don't want anybody to think that discussing fighting or talking about fighting at a practice is a bad thing, or at an event, because the only way, Ron says, I went out, how do you do this thing? Show me this thing. But then you have to practice the thing. Practice. You've heard me talk about a bat buddy or a fighter buddy before. You need somebody that you can talk things over with. Brannos had somebody who practiced with, saying speeches and stuff, the the ceremonies before practice, he would go over. But it is important to say, I've seen so and so do this. You know me. How could I work that into my practice? Like, how can I, I'm not 6'7", so how can I best make that work? Or I've seen so and so do the thing, but I don't get it. Can you tell me about that? And we learn a lot, when you break it down, and somebody was talking about the little steps, you break it down to the little teensy tiny steps if you have to. I'm a break it down to tiny steps kind of person. I'm a physically move my body from here to there if I have to learn how to do things. So I don't want to discount. We've been talking about doing, because that's how you solidify your body and your neuromuscular pathways. But you have to know what you're doing, and you have to be able to talk about it. And I think that these guys have made it really clear that it's okay to talk at practice. You don't just come in, because also it's a chance to hang with your buddies, right? But you have to know what's going on. You have to say, I've socialized enough now. Now is the time for fighting.
Well, there's socialization, and then, there's socialization, and then there's fundamentally learning, right? So if we're talking fighting and we're talking techniques and we're breaking something down and we're helping somebody understand something, that goes a little different it goes a little different than necessarily, hey, how was your day? Did you get ice cream this weekend? That kind of scenario, right? So,
right.
So just be aware. And even that conversation is a good conversation. We all have it when we get there. But when you really want to focus on practice, focus on practice. And when we're all trying to help each other, those are the kind of conversations you absolutely want to have. We talk in fights all the time. We'll fight. We're like, okay, try these couple of things. And we'll go back into fighting. It was like, okay, you did this a little bit. Let's try it again. Okay, let's do it a little bit slow. Whatever. We have conversations while we're doing this stuff, that all the time. There's a place for both. Just be careful. If somebody's in one place, don't come over and it's like, oh, it's great to see you. And they're in the middle of really trying to get practice in. So you've got to be a little careful on that scenario and at practice, because it could derail some people's focus. And that's a big thing for especially people that have a hard time understanding those things. It takes effort and time, right? So let's go over. It looks like Ron's having a little trouble there. I muted him for a second there. I think we may have lost him. But performance psychology, this is essentially the ability to have a constructive mindset. Oh,
God, I have questions for you, Brannos.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Sorry, Brannos wants to talk about having a good mindset. But one of the things, and this is actually practical. I wanted to ask you about this. I'm so excited. So one of the things you say that you like to see, and you ask your squires to do, is that practice, write down 3 things that went really well for them at practice.
Mm-hmm.
So so I tried that, and some nights I can't find 3. So I figure if I can't find 3, I must be looking at the wrong things. So can you give examples? And I know Alfwin, I don't know if you're watching, Sir Alfwin keeps a fighting diary, and I think and it's great. She goes back and talks about it, but I don't know what to write in a fighting diary.
So that's kind of the fun one. And then, it was funny when I asked Ronald to do this because we were going through other things. But I asked him to do it, and he, when you look at yourself for so long in the critical, it's really hard to find good things about yourself. And I do this with Side as well. And they'll go through, I can't think of anything else. And I'm like, I saw this and this and this and this. So sometimes go ask someone else. So, if you're like, I just can't think of anything I did good in that fight, go over to that person and say, hey, I'm not feeling, just tell them it's like trying to write down some good things I did. I'm not seeing it. I really enjoyed the fight, but I don't see where I did anything good. Or, did I do anything in there that you think, that you thought was a danger? That you made you feel threatened? Any of that kind of stuff? Because even just making your opponent threatened, that is a good thing. So tonight I went and I made all my opponents feel threatened. Or tonight I went and made that knight feel threatened. And sometimes you don't recognize it because you think, oh, this is just a normal thing. Well, we are trying to practice normal things, and doing a normal thing good should be written down.
So one of the top for a good psychological being able to look from where you were, as you said earlier tonight, to where you are now. You can write down things. What would you suggest that people write down in a fighting diary?
So I always do not only the 3 good things you did, but the 3 things that you think you could improve on. Because, later on, you can look at go back all the way to the beginning and say, probably look way at the early and say, oh boy, I could move much better. And now it's like, you look at her movement game as like, well, there's not much better is, she's past that and way along, right? That's not something she's probably going to write down a lot anymore. But that's the idea. It's like, if it's week after week of, hey, I still can't make the fake ain't working, the fake ain't working, the fake ain't working. It's like, oh, I got somebody to pick up the fake. Oh, and then all of a sudden you don't have the fake ain't working anymore, and you're into things that you think you could do better, right? So, which probably means that the fake is working better, and it's not as big of a thing. You got other things to work on now.
Okay, so I didn't mean to derail your topic, but this is something that you've talked about so much. And I was speaking to Alpha a couple of nights ago, and she mentioned it again. And I thought that maybe this would be for people who are less athletically inclined.
Yeah.
You want to be able to compare yourself to where you were and where you're going, that you could bring it in. But I'm sorry, for some reason, I just had to say it right away. So guys,
No.
Sorry I interrupted.
I think that fits right into that performance psychology piece. I think it's exactly what we're talking about. And it's the reason why I brought up that it's not you against somebody else. It's you against you. And the best part about you against you is you will always have somebody to compete against because it's yourself, right? You could go to a practice and kill everyone there, but you're not competing against them. You're competing against yourself. Did you do everything? Even though you killed everybody, did you do everything right? I mean, it's the same thing when you go win a tournament. Like, Ronald wins a tournament and he can't tell you who he knocked out in the final, in the final 4 fights, but he sure could tell you everybody who touched him through the whole tournament, because those, in his mind, those are failures that he has to fix.
So for people who are less athletically inclined, because that's where we're looking at tonight, what can we say to them for the psychology of it? Is the looking at the 3 things, is that something you would recommend?
Oh, of course. The diary is always something, and go review it, because sometimes mentally you just need to believe. And that's that performance psychology piece of fighting or any sport. If I tell you, I could be the greatest basketball player in the world. If I have a bad game and I can't get out of it, I'm just going to have another bad game.
So if somebody was like using the fakes as an example, so I have 14 weeks in a row, fakes failed, fucking fakes, hate fakes, can't
exactly.
Fakes are stupid, never faking again. But having that for 14 weeks as an unathletically inclined person, I might look at that and feel a little bit more athletically uninclined because, damn it, I can't do fakes. But my
Really?
determination.
Would you give up?
Well, I might. Really, I'd be like, screw you, me. You're not the boss of me.
And what would you do to fix that?
So probably I would end up talking to friends like, guys, I've been trying to throw fakes. They're not working. So first I would talk to my fighting buddy about it. Like, hey, you know me, what's going on? And then they could say, well, best try this or try that. And then I could try the this or the that. So if that didn't work, rather, because I don't want to necessarily tell the people I'm trying to fake, because if you go, by the way, fakes are coming, then they're going to, even if like, now they know at some point fakes are coming. So even unconsciously, if they're aware of it. But then at the end of the evening, then perhaps go and talk to the people. Hey, I tried to throw some fakes and none of them worked. What was I doing wrong? I have been throwing fakes for 14 weeks in a row now, and nothing has freaking worked. Why? And I suppose that would be at week 14. I don't know why I picked 14, but there you have it.
Yeah, but I mean, so that's that point of really you're trying to fix a problem, and that's for some people, 14 weeks of doing it, they're like, I'm no good at it, I quit. But you're not quitting, and that's what makes that what we're talking about, natural, not natural type of scenario. Really, I'd love to say a natural fighter who also really is focused on training and all those things can absolutely, and gets even more physically natural, can absolutely be a great fighter. But it's not mentally, they may be weak. And so, yes, they have an advantage at the beginning, but at the end, there's a lot of other things. And, one of these things, let's talk about a couple of them. Body awareness, understanding how your muscles work, your joints, your skeletal structure, if you're fast or slow, the speed you have, the flexibility. All of those things are not only things you have to understand about yourself, but also some of these things, you can work on. You can strengthen your body a little bit. You can learn how to breathe better. Speed's always tough, but you can increase your speed some. There's all kinds of things like that help you become a better fighter. Confidence. There's nothing natural about confidence. You learn to be confident, right? And that, you have to believe in your ability, and that mental, resilience is a huge piece, right? If you have that mental resilience, I'd rather find somebody that is like mentally they're strong because they will just keep going. And I can put them with a trainer and get them to know techniques better and get them physically stronger and get them to physically jump higher and stuff like that. But if you have a weak mind, it doesn't matter how natural you are, right? At some point, you're just going to give up.
Yeah. And I think we've all seen that. And I do want to say, if you're fighting and if you're not having fun, and if you tried and tried and tried, and if you finally make the decision that, fighting's not for you, you tried it. You said, I actually was out there and I tried it. And I don't think anybody would fault you for that, to say, I went out and I tried and it's just not for me. And that I want to emphasize that's okay. At the very least, you tried. Because I know a lot of people stay possibly longer than they want to because they feel like they'll disappoint people, but you have to like what you're doing. I'm stubborn and spiteful towards myself, so I'm like, screw you, me, you don't quit. But
exactly.
Like I laugh when I say it because it's a joke. It's so for me, it's a funny thing, but I do want to emphasize that. But there are a lot of things, Brannos, you were talking about the knowing your body and what it can do, and you can practice that. Some of you may not know I had surgery recently on my knee, and one of the things I'm doing is called proprioception, and it's knowing where your body is. It's kind of woo-woo, but it's not. It's knowing where your body is, like in the time-space continuum. And one of the things they have me doing literally is just standing on my right leg, because that's the one I had surgery, with my eyes closed. I fall over a lot because it turns out I don't really know where my body is in space and time and all that stuff. So you can practice those things while you're at home. Brush your teeth with your eyes closed. Start with 2 legs, go to 1 leg. And it sounds goofy, and it kind of is, but it actually really works.
And that's, again, neurodevelopment. You're learning how to spatially put those things. It's like a little kid who's first time with a fork, and they're like,
where's my mouth?
Oh, there you go. And then in a week, they're like, they're just going, right? That's that kind of that neuro piece kind of fitting in. It takes longer for an adult, but for kids, it's like go. On the last couple of things of the performance psychology, another one is mindset, and that is the idea of having a good mental mindset, right? That's a big piece. Approach to feedback. Here's a great example. If I find a person, this is the thing I really look for. If I find a person that's like, I give them feedback and you can tell that they try it, compared to I give somebody feedback and I know that they don't care about the feedback. They just want another fight. You know who I'd rather work with? Right? There's one person trying to learn, the other person just trying to fight and learn, right? They're not actually listening. They're just trying to figure their way through the whole thing.
And as a trainer, that's really frustrating. You say to somebody, I saw you were doing this, and they say, yeah, but I did it because. Yeah, but I'm doing this. Now, if you come to me and you say, I can't do that because I am mechanically unable, like, oh, my shoulders don't work. I've torn my rotator cuff. I got new shoulders. I've had surgery. I have bad knees. Okay, that's one thing. But when you are physically able to do the thing. And I say, I notice you're doing the thing wrong. And they go, yeah, but at that point, and then they say, but I'm not getting any better. And I think, yeah, but you're not trying. Why? Yeah, but.
Well, and here's another one. I know. That was a John Eric look right there. A Ronald look. He does that same look. I know. I've had people. I'm like, oh, you know, I guess we're done then.
Well, okay then. Get better.
That's all I can do. Good luck.
Go for it. Fight.
So that's that approach to feedback. It's super important for everyone. I don't care. Again, this is not a scenario of talent or non-talented type of deal. And the last piece is curiosity, and that's an interesting one because it's not the approach to feedback. And that curiosity means, can I do this? You know, a lot of people are like, if they don't try it, you know, if they're not comfortable, they don't try it. The people you want are the ones that are not comfortable, but they're going to give it a try and they're going to keep working at it, see if they can make it work. And that goes a really long way, that diligence of trying to get something to work and being curious. You may find that it doesn't work and you just throw it away, but you're willing to go on to the next thing. Huge part of essentially that mental game. So body architecture, I'm just going to burn through a couple as we're getting towards the end of the show. You know, this goes right into a little bit what you're talking about, your physical trainer, right? I guarantee you there's probably times you're going to say, you know, they're going to talk about your body composition, you know, and, you know, they may even go into understanding, you know, a person that's heavier needs to understand how they fight compared to when they're lighter. We see people lose weight a lot and then their fighting goes way off and they have to relearn how to fight. But, you know, along with body composition, there's muscle mass, there's fast twitch and slow twitch fiber, there's fiber activation, there's bone density. But, you know, and a lot of those are predetermined by genetics. Some of them can be altered by training and nutrition, but understand those are all things you have to understand to be a better fighter, especially if maybe you don't have all the genetic abilities some other people have. The more you understand those, the less they do, the more chance you have to pass them up. Right?
Absolutely.
And then we get into, of course, natural ability as part of the body architecture. And that is, you know, that ability to, sometimes natural ability is ability to learn. Maybe it's not a natural ability in physical sense, but you might have natural ability in learning. That goes a long way, but nobody talks about that much, right? Oh, they got natural ability. That means they could just go out and do it physically. And that's, you know, I could jump higher. But you know what? If you have mentally, you have natural ability, maybe you don't need to jump.
Point.
Right? And then you have things like functionality, genetics, like we just talked about. And then, you know, we really get into that physical trainability. And that's what we've been talking about is that, again, we can't say training enough on the show. We can't, you know, and the best part is I think everybody's starting to understand how important that is. And just because you don't have a place to train doesn't mean training doesn't mean you have to do things physically. Like a lot of people, they'll go home and they'll train by watching videos, watching fights, watching their own fights, you know, thinking, meditating around doing perfect technique. Again, there's lots of, they took top basketball players, two groups basketball players did a whole, one group didn't shoot free throws, the other group shot free throws the whole time. The top people in each division shot exactly the same, even though one group didn't practice and the other group did practice. The lower people is where you see the difference. So just be aware that there's lots of ways to train other than just physically. If you don't have the people there, you don't have 2 or 3 fight practices, you don't have all of those things, find an event, make the time with the people, ping them before. Can I get a couple minutes of your time at the event to go through some stuff with you? Do you mind training me? Palomar did that, by the way, with me for years. He saw, you know, he'd love when I was out there and nobody would come out. He's like, thank you again, everyone, for giving me free training with Brannos. But he would be like, hey, I'm going to this event. Do we have time? I'm like, I'm always going to have time for you. Right. And he made sure, and he cut videos constantly and sent them to me. We review them. We go to an event, we would practice them, and he was dedicated. and then he won crown, a year later. So, not that he can't win crown a lot, but he was changing styles. He changed a lot of his style and went and won crown again. And the idea is he made that time. That was not on me. That was on him. He could have gone to lots of other good trainers and probably done the same thing. So, just realize that's a big piece.
We have. Sorry. Go ahead.
No.
I must say we have a viewer comment. Thomas says a lot of folks who will not try something new at practice. There you have it. Have too big a concern of seeming silly or looking bad
or failing.
Yeah, it's a fear of failure. I think it's. And I'm going to say I acknowledge that this exists. The fear exists, but I would say that everybody has had this fear at some point in time. I would say if you're working with people who you trust, they're not going to laugh. And I 100% guarantee that you're not going to look stupid. I have literally fallen on my face and people say, what happened? I say, I tripped. We've all tripped. Someone throws a blow, your sword goes, flying out your hand. What happened? I got knocked out with my hand. As stupid as you think you look, from anything that you can imagine, is not an uncommon situation at fight practice. Like I hate to say it, but it's true. We've all seen it. We've seen sword break, in tournaments and go flying off into the crowd. You don't look stupid. You might feel stupid, and I can't tell you not to feel stupid, but I promise you that you won't be looking stupid, and people won't be like laughing and going, wow, that person is so stupid. If there is laughter, it's in 100% sympathy, because we have all been there.
Yeah.
Nobody laughs at a little kid when they fall down. They're like, oh yeah, we've been there. Nobody laughs. If in the Olympics, if somebody falls and trips, no one laughs. They don't look stupid. We feel bad for them because
we feel bad.
Yeah. So please, I understand that there's the fear of failure or the fear of that people were viewing you as failing or looking stupid or being silly, but I can guarantee that that's not happening. And we've all been there. Absolutely. We've all been there.
So, I'm just going to, and it's interesting because we were on a show last night and Helga, we were talking a little bit, and she mentioned, like her knight was Havek, who's probably a foot plus taller than her. And he used to have her stand on a bucket and throw so she could understand how to fight somebody the same size. Or he would essentially stand in a hole and help understand that size, right? And then he would totally switch it around and make her taller and himself shorter so she could understand those things. And I thought, that's exactly, the more you understand, the better you can understand how to change it and apply it. And I thought that was a great training scenario. I'm going to just point out some, just for those people that are out there that are like, well, I'm not athletic, so I won't be the first one picked. They had a little thing that they kind of covered about coaches picking people and that they want to coach, and some of the things they ask. And here's a couple of the things, and I thought they were very good. Do they give up when things become challenging? Or when they're not challenging enough, right? Do they show promise when taught new skills from scratch? Do they listen to instruction, right? How do they react when they receive correction? And then they look and say, is the body built for strength, speed, or flexibility? And then they figure out how they want to use them. And then there was a couple others, do they have a good mental feel for being a team member, that positive team member atmosphere? But, the ideas here is most of these, and there's only really one on this speed, strength, and flexibility. Those are all things pretty much anybody can have. Those aren't gifts. Those are abilities that we can all work better at, including great people who don't want to listen, because that's even a bigger problem. So, and that kind of goes back to that fear of failure. I'll give you an example, and we're leading to the end of the show, and we talked about this before. We've been lucky here to have a lot of kings. In fact, we have a king in the group right now. But in the past, we've had kings come in and I've watched them come back, and they don't get they're not as focused. They don't get as many fights at either end of the throne. They have lots of other things going on, so they don't get as much time thinking about fighting. So usually what happens, you think that the king would come back better, and that's not usually the case. And then the question is, what do they do when they come back to practice? And more than not, they have come back to practice. They fight the top tier people, and they start losing a little bit. They lose fights they didn't lose before. So you know what they do? They go to the next tier. And then they feel good about themselves because everybody told the king that he was great and that he's the best thing. And, he just won crown, so he must be the best, and then they'll start fighting those people. And because he or she is not pushing themselves, they start losing some more. And then they go down to the next level. And it takes, and I've seen them go all the way down to unbelts, even lower than that, newer people, and finally come back and say, okay, what am I doing? And that what they did is they realized that they still have work to do no matter what. But be aware, that goes into that fear of failing, fear of losing, terrible mentalities. The fear should be you're not learning, that you're not making enough attempt to learn, and that you're not open to learning, and that you're stagnating. And that should be your fear. And guess what? It doesn't matter if you're physically have great abilities or not. So, all right. I think we're Sivert, if you want to pop on. I see Ron's still having some issues. We apologize, but it was great having him on the show. I hope that episode was good. I know I love talking this stuff. Bess, thank you for jumping on. You're totally awesome. And, I was really actually happy to have you on because I saw you from the beginning when obviously you were still, I was lucky enough to see you when you were coming up.
I was so new.
Coming up on belt. But your defense was incredible. But I saw that growth in offense in you over the years. And it was incredible to watch. You just had that constant pushing performance. And it's like, that's that tenacity you talked about. And that's why I thought you were going to be a great fighter and why you became a great fighter. It was that tenacity that you had and the time you put in and the effort you put towards it. All of those things we talked about tonight, I just want to make sure everybody understands we all have it within us. I want to make sure all the coaches and trainers out there understand that don't discount people. I tell you, I'd rather pick somebody that isn't natural because a lot of times they're not good learners, and pick the ones that step one up at a time, because over time they will just keep getting better and better and better and better. And in the long run, they understand how to learn and they will keep learning forever. So don't discount people. Look for potential in everybody. Have faith in them. And if you put the effort into them and you help them understand, they don't have to be great to still be very proud of somebody and what they've done. So, what do you got, Bess? Anything else? Do you want to talk?
Honestly, I think we've covered everything. I think you wrapped it up beautifully and succinctly.
Wonderful. Sivert, I'm going to throw this one out. You know what next week's show is? Or 2 weeks from now?
No, I don't. I looked at the schedule.
This is what happens when you become a knight. You all of a sudden you don't do your homework anymore.
Sorry, normally I post it into the group chat. I didn't do that this week.
Our next one is physical training in our sport. And I think that one is going to have Eli and Tristan and Bess. I think you're on that one.
Oh,
and that is how to train for our sport. What training for, and how to be the best at what we're trying to do well. And I think some of that we covered even with like targeting tonight when Ron talked about targeting and things like that. So I think they're going to probably go over more and more of that stuff. And I think it feeds right into this show. Is remember, we're trying to give you tools to keep becoming better at what you do. And remember, the comparison is the old you and the new you.
Yeah,
that's where you should be comparing, and that will last a lifetime, which is far better than worrying about where you are on the scale of I'm beating somebody or not beating somebody. You'll be much more satisfied, and having a satisfied life is a winning life. All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for the show. Sivert, I'd like to thank all the moving people around and posting our questions up for you and doing these for us. And congratulations real quick on becoming King's champion, by the way. You've had a busy couple months here.
I didn't know that. That's super.
Yeah, it is. He's if nobody has had a chance to fight or meet Sivert, please take an opportunity. He's for me, he's an example of what a really good knight is. So I look forward to everyone else. I look forward to seeing you soon and being on another show soon. I hope you had a great time. It's not going into the weekend, so I hope the end of your work week is wonderful and that you have a great weekend with friends and family or with both. And we'll see you soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.